All right, another Full Grip Games GLC 3K tournament in the books, this time for the Pitch Black set release. And it wasn't won by Psychic, so I guess that means no more purple cards getting banned, at least until, what, November? Well, Psychic certainly was still the most played type, but there was a new second place type in the metagame, with Colorless suddenly pushing out Fighting as the most, or the second most popular type at this event, headlined by the brand new Toucanon. It seems that Pitch Black has helped to mix things up and keep the meta from stagnating into a Psychic versus Fighting deadlock, as some of us may have feared. And this event had a massive turnout of 120 players, so I'm also glad to see that players aren't being deterred from the format as I had worried about after the last 3K. Big thank you to Natalie for sending me all the lists the day after the tournament, and thank you to Tricky Jim for live streaming the event and showing the standings. With 31 decks, Psychic's meta share dropped to 25%, with the influx of more non-Psychic players, below the 30% we've seen at the last two 3Ks, and as mentioned, Colorless was the second most played color at 19%. Fighting was still at third with 20 decks at 16% of the meta, and fourth being Water with 17 decks at 14%. After that, we dropped down to single digits with Dragon at 8 decks, Dark and Grass at 6, Fire surprisingly not last with 4 decks, Metal at 3, and Lightning at 2. So this time Fairy was the only deck not represented in the field. I'll go ahead and just throw up on the screen the breakdown for all the sub-archetypes for each of the types that were played. And as we go through the video, I'll be breaking these archetypes down in more detail. And that increased type diversity since the previous 3K makes a lot of sense, because this tournament featured a special prize for the players that did the best with their chosen type in special one-of-a-kind stamped promos from the store for each type. A little bit of meta manipulation, but honestly a much needed one. I love this idea because while I'm sure it had no influence on the most competitive players that surely chose their decks still based purely on what they thought was going to win, I'm sure it had a hand in diversifying the more casual entries in the tournament to play more obscure types to try and win those promos. So first I'm going to go over the decks that were in the top 8. Speaking of meta manipulation, the headline of this tournament was without a doubt Andrew Mahone's new Toucanon Colorless deck.
But can we talk about how my deck won? Woohoo!
He had won the previous week's Full Grip GLC League with a 6-0 record and had posted a video about a few days before the tournament. 13 players ended up bringing Andrew's 60 to the tournament, more than any other deck archetype, including a lot of big names at Full Grip like Ben Peacock, Anthony Saya, John Patterson, Hunter Horak, and Alex Carpenter. And Jesse Parker ended up winning the tournament with the Colorless deck against Psychic in the finals, along with Ben Peacock and Tony Saya placing in the top 8 with the deck, which gives the deck an impressive 23% conversion rate when compared to the 10.8% representation in the overall field. Now, before we start talking about this deck in detail and all the new cards, I just want to point out there is no Thumping Snore Snorlax in this Colorless deck. In fact, out of the 23 players that played Colorless, only 2 players opted to run the Lost Origins Snorlax in their deck, which is kind of just wild to me as someone who started playing GLC at the height of Snorlax's power. It seems that with the loss of the double energies, the move to triple energies, and the ever-present threat of fighting, and specifically Marshadow, Snorlax is actually kind of just bad right now and was probably actively pulling the type down for people that were running it. Just a wild shift in the metagame, and it shows that really nothing should ever be considered sacred in deck building. So, looking at this new Colorless deck, we see the usual suspects for Colorless aggro: Fan Rotom to set up and take early KOs, Squovit, Bibarel, and Oranguru to draw cards, Hops Cramorant and Hops Snorlax to take mid-game KOs, and Hops Stubwool to gust and pinch hit for 110. We've also got Cinccino to draw cards instead of the more popular Dodrio, which draws less cards than Cinccino but can usually attack. And I'm guessing that's because the Dodrio tends to become an easy free KO by cards like Blacephalon, Blindside, and Tinglu. But we also have the brand new Toucanon from Pitch Black as a centerpiece in this deck, able to hit up to 260 damage for just 1 energy with a full bench. And even against a half bench, this thing is generally not hitting for less than 200 damage. This Toucanon really shored up Colorless's matchups into Wailord and Okidogi decks, and it even survives an attack from Okidogi itself. Another big feature of the deck is Lost City. This is a super powerful stadium card that can win certain matchups when deployed at the right time. But you have to have the right tools around it for it to work and not be a double-edged sword. And this deck has enough redundant attackers and support pieces to not be screwed over by it. And importantly, it has 3 gust effects to make sure that the key piece on the opponent's board is getting lost zoned when this stadium comes down. And Skyla, or Petrol in Jesse's case, is another way to find the lost city when you need it, in addition to Goose Hollow. Greedent is another interesting piece in this deck. It allows Skwovet to get a sudden HP boost so that it's not a sitting duck on the bench, and also lets it act as an additional attacker.
Like, sure. Because this is the game state you keep getting to, is like Toucanon is here, and then who is number 6? Spill out for game. And that's it.
That's crazy. Holy cow.
We also see no U-turn board in this deck, a massive change up from past colorless decks, and instead we see Air Balloon being run alongside Floatstone. That may be related to another tech choice in this deck, the Lost Vacuum, which is apparently getting very popular in the full grip meta, and for good reason. You get to permanently cripple Psychic decks relying on U-turn board as its only pivot tool by lost zoning it, and also a great piece of tech against control decks that are trying to loop cards like Lux Cape and Pokestop. So if your second pivot tool is just going to get sent to the lost zone and removed anyway, you may as well use the stronger retreat tool, which is the Air Balloon. And then looking at the energies, it's interesting to see both triple energies being played here when it's pretty much only Hops Double and Greedent that need them to attack. But yeah, super cool deck, and as Mahone kept on pointing out during the stream, this deck is brand new, and there's probably going to be plenty of room to tinker and optimize the deck going forward. We could see cards like Battle VIP Pass, Tag Call, or Sacred Ash find their way into builds. Mahone swears by the new Trumbeak with the fly attack to use in emergencies, but I feel like fitting in a basic energy or two to be able to use the Charging Trumpet with Cypher Maniac, that Trumbeak, would also open up the opportunity to be able to play Raihan in the deck and give you more access to acceleration, making it easier to attack with that Hops Snorlax, which cannot make use of those triple energies. The Enhanced Fang Greedent has less HP, but it still does 160 damage for 3 energy if it has a Pokemon tool attached. So that's another evolution that will use that triple energy. And it also importantly has 2 retreat. So if you've already attached your Air Balloon to your Skwovet, you won't lose the ability to pivot with it if you have to evolve into Greedent. That's my deep dive on the big new deck of the tournament. But probably just as big as the Toucanon has to be the massive upset of Mike Gibbs taking Alakazam all the way to the finals. Alakazam, while it's a big player in Standard right now, it's not supposed to be a major archetype in Psychic GLC. And not only that, we also see no Iron Boulder in this deck anywhere. Colorless decks without Snorlax, Psychic decks without Iron Boulder. What is going on here? But it seems Mike saw the potential of Kadabra and Alakazam's draw abilities and the ability to do big damage for 1 energy, allowing it to take big knockouts on things like Wailord that Psychic tends to struggle against. And we actually got to see Mike get multiple uses out of those draw abilities on stream with Scoop Up Net. Come to think of it, it's actually very similar in function to what Toucannon is doing in the colorless decks. And that's why we don't see Iron Boulder here, since you don't want to be shrinking your hand down to hand match, since you want to have a big hand for that Alakazam attack. And with Zam's attack costing only 1 energy, it creates a lot of opportunities to allocate excess energy to the Deoxys instead. And along with Psychic Mirage Gardevoir, this was probably the best Deoxys deck at the tournament. We can see that he's still running the Silent Lab and the Hex Maniac to turn off bench barriers on those key Deoxys turns. So Giratina is there to KO the small stuff, Alakazam handles the big stuff, and then Deoxys, Munkidori, and Blacephalon set up opportunities to take multiple prizes. So super awesome Psychic deck that does not look like anything I think anybody was predicting to make it into the top 8, let alone the finals. And then we had 2 other Psychic decks in the top 8, and despite all the talk about Natu Blindside being the current BDIF, it was actually a non-Blindside 60 piloted by Brooke and Winter, who made the top 8. I believe Brooke was in the top 4 and Winter was in the top 8. This was pretty much the same deck that Brooke and Winter played at the Chaos Rising 3K, from what I can tell. The only differences I could spot were they cut Mystery Energy and N to add Floatstone and Cynthia and Caitlyn. So it seems that the argument for not including the Blindside Natu package is that the 2 cards that you need for that combo, which are the Technical Machine Blindside and the Strange Timepiece or Devolution Spray, they're dead cards until the very moment that you need them for the combo. Whereas running Deoxys just takes up 1 deck slot.
Yeah, Deoxys coming in hot. Size Spear, going to do 120 to 2 things.
And otherwise you can keep everything the same pretty much. And it has a decent attack for 120, even on the turns that you can't get 5 energy on it. So you can still get KOs with that. So it's no surprise that they were able to come out on top with their very optimized and practiced build of Iron Boulder Deoxys. Coming in 5th place, the only fighting deck in the top 8 was the RDT fighting deck, although now including Hariyama along with the usual suspects of, Hawlucha, Tinglu, Blood Moon Ursaluna, and Marshadow, which characterizes RDT from the Barbiyama deck. Now originally I wanted to use this placement as proof that it seems that RDT is kind of proving itself to be the superior fighting build in the meta, since it also was the only fighting deck, I believe, or the only 2 that top 8'd at the previous 3K. But having looked at the full tournament deck breakdown, I do see a lot of Barbiyamas in the top 24 and only 1 other RDT. So considering there was only 1 other RDT fighting deck in the tournament and it did not do so well. However, I think it's safe to say that Tinglu absolutely gives RDT the edge over this new Toucan colorless deck, which does not have access to bench barrier as we mentioned, and also gives it a much better answer to the fighting resistance to Toucannon as well, if you can tag it for 30 damage while it's still on the bench. Some notable tech cards in this version of RDT. Once again, we see Lost Vacuum being played over Field Blower in this deck. We also see Lost City being used in this deck, which is fantastic with the Hariyama as well as the Boss's Orders and the Guzma in the deck. You have plenty of opportunities to Lost City an important target, and you have a much wider variety of attackers than just the Okidogi in RDT. You do have to be careful, though, about not letting your Soul Rock get Lost Zone. That can be pretty bad. Olivier was also playing Canceling Cologne in his deck as well, a fantastic tech card which both counters the opponent's Okidogi in the Fighting Mirror, but also can serve other purposes, such as allowing you or giving you a 3rd way to turn off opponent's bench barriers by gusting them to the active slot with one of your 3 gust cards before hitting them with the Cologne to help you spread more with Tinglu. It also helps with turning off Ability Lock Pokemon, which could otherwise counter your Okidogi's offensive ability, things like Galarian Wheezing and Wobbuffet. And I think with this recent meta development, we will probably be seeing a bit more Wobbuffet in Psychic decks to help counter the rise of the colorless decks as well as fighting decks. And our final top 8 deck was the colorless Ursaluna Control, played by Sebastian Lashmit to 6th place. And if you're not familiar with this deck yet, the idea is to set up an Ursaluna, which has 180 HP, and then keep on healing it with max potions, alternating between taking knockouts and recovering your max potions with that Pete Hunt attack. And basically making it so you have an invincible Ursaluna, and because you are not solely relying on decking out the opponent, you have a much faster clock with this type of control deck, which makes it probably one of the best control decks to play into a timed tournament right now anyway. Now, one of the biggest weaknesses of this deck is getting its Ursaluna lost zoned. And as we saw, there was a lot of Lost City in this tournament, specifically in the colorless 2-cannon deck. So it's actually pretty impressive that Sebastian was able to navigate his way through that to the top 8. But he did finally go down to Jesse in the quarterfinals playing that 2-cannon deck. Apparently got the Teddy Ursa lost zoned in game 1 and getting that Ursaluna knocked out and lost zoned in the other game. And before we move on from the top 8, I just want to point out a couple of things I noticed. Every single deck in the top 8 was playing Reset Stamp, which I find very interesting. That card was not very popular just 1 or 2 years ago, and I think is showing just how powerful it has become, especially of course when it's run with Hex Maniac. But just having that item-based hand disruption is very powerful right now. And then additionally, we saw 0 ball guys in the top 8, which I thought was also interesting, as that card used to be considered an absolute staple. Now we do see cards like Winona being played in colorless. We saw Dawn getting played in Mike's Psychic deck, but no ball guy. And I'm wondering, is ball guy on its way out of the format as a staple? Despite the fact that it's a supporter that for 1 card you can get basic Pokemon, evolution Pokemon, both from your deck and from your prizes with the Hisuian Heavy Ball. So I'm very interested to see if maybe people are going to start moving away from ball guy, or if people already are moving away in their more successful GLC decks. All right, so next up, we're going to be taking a look at the top players for their respective types outside of the top 8. So remember, they got special one-of-a-kind promo cards from the tournament with a holofoil stamp. So starting with Eric Worcester in 23rd place was the top Dragon player, who was playing a Jet Cruise Evolving Dragons build. Pretty standard looking build from what I can see, with the Jet Cruise Dragonite, the Sonic Slip Garchomp, which is the promo that he won for that. It's got the Drac Cloak and then a smattering of utility and attacking basics and dragons. So yeah, pretty standard build, relying on the 180 HP on the Dragonite and the Sonic Slip on the Garchomp to prevent the opponents from taking knockouts, and took it to a respectable 5-2 finish. And then in 24th place was Evan Wickland of Team Turbo Blaze, who was playing the Milo Pump water deck and was the top finishing water player. And this is the melodic deck where you can get back any card with that ability. And the whole idea is to just set up a Whale Lord over and over again to force your opponent to have to deal with that. And unfortunately, we're going to be looking at this deck again later in the video. Spoiler, under the Fraud Watch. I do love their deck choices. I love the move from Octillery to Swampert to go along with swapping Arizu for Dawn. I'm sure this is a deck that likes being able to hold a large hand with all the tricks that it can pull off, especially with the Melodic. And I very much look forward to hearing about the experience from the Turbo Blazers over on their YouTube channel. And then in 32nd place, we have Luna, who was the top grass player, playing the Terraplume deck to a 4-3 record. This is the same Terraplume deck we've seen since, I believe, the Perfect Order 3K when it got top 8. I believe the only new card we're seeing here is the Rescue Scarf being played over the Stealthy Hood. And Rescue Scarf is actually a great counter to Lost City. Because of the way those two effects interact with each other, you can return the Pokemon to your hand instead of having it get Lost Zoned by the Lost City. Now, I feel like there was a lot of hype around Terraplume, especially after the Perfect Order 3K, and we haven't seen it top 8 since. But since Luna was the only player playing it this time and did have a positive win rate, I don't think we can call Terraplume fraud just yet. But just below Luna, we have Seth at 33rd place with Dark, running the new Chi-Yu from Pitch Black alongside a very svelte 11 Pokemon lineup of Guzzlord, Spiritomb, and Weavile as the other main attackers, and just Toxtricity and Frozen City to enable the Chi-Yu and the Spiritomb. Then we have the best fire player at 43rd place, played by Thomas Headley, who was playing the good old Zard Embor double acceleration fire deck to a 4-3 record. And then Lightning at 58th place by Andrew Carlson, featuring a Joltik in a spread deck, and not even bothering to play the new Voltaic Energy, probably to make room for those grass energies for the Joltik. And then finally, Metal at the bottom, with Jacob Skeens being the top Metal player in 69th place, playing the Arch Nemesis Metal deck. And that brings us to our Fraud Watch segment, where we're going to take a look at the lists that have previously been hyped or thought to be powerful, but did not perform well at this tournament. And we'll go ahead and start off with the Arch Nemesis deck, the former Andrew Mahone darling, featuring the Coded Attack Archaludon, which blocks all damage from basic Pokemon, now just casually tossed aside for the newer, shinier model. There were 2 players using this deck at this event, and both with 3 and 4 records. And I think this is just a metagame issue. We had a meta previously where basics were doing all the attacking for a while, and Archaludon was really good. But now we're kind of back to seeing a more balanced mix of basics and evolved attackers, and so the deck is struggling again. Seems pretty simple. Next, for Fraud Watch, we've got Tyrantrum, a card that a lot of people were excited about since the card made top 8 at the Perfect Order 3K and generated a lot of excitement with the new Fossil Stadium card from Pitch Black. But 2 players did play the card, and neither were able to attain a positive win rate. This one might just need more time to cook. We had 1 player playing it alongside Rampardos with the new stadium. Another player was trying to fit it into a sort of RDT shell with Marshadow and Ursaluna alongside Barbaracle. So there's probably still a lot of optimizing left to be done with the Tyrantrum as we figure out how to make these fossil cards work. Now, Chestnut Grass was getting a lot of hype during the Full Grip Games League weeks leading up to this event, and in fact 4 players seem to have brought a very similar, or at least same 60 card Chestnut deck with the same Pokemon lineup utilizing the Cherum, Beautifly, the Wo-Chien, and the Rallyback Tropius, although it does seem Michael Prieto was on his own slightly different trainer lineup, while Chase, Duncan, and Dylan seem to have been running the same 60, and the best record among them was 3 and 4. Which moves us into the biggest fraud watch of the event, in my opinion, Milo Pump, played by Team Turbo Blaze. 9 players brought this deck to the event, I believe the second most played archetype after the Toucanon deck. And while Evan did manage to claw his way back from 0-2 to a 5-2 record, only 2 of the 9 Milo Pump players were able to attain a positive win rate with this deck. Now it's important to note Milo Pump was still the best performing water deck at the tournament, and there were also 6 regular Hydro Pump decks without Melodic that didn't really do any better. So I don't think it's that Milopump isn't necessarily the best version of water right now. I think it may just be that Wailord and maybe tanky Pokemon in general just isn't the basket you want to be putting all of your eggs in right now if you're expecting a lot of Toucannon in the metagame. And now that moves us into the Weirdos section, where we're going to take a look at some of the rogue off-meta and more fun and whimsical decks that had a respectable showing, starting with Tyler Owens, who went 5-2 with the all-flying colorless deck, where every Pokemon has a resistance to fighting. And we've got some interesting choices here, along with the typical Toucannon, Fanrotom, Pelipper, Swellow, and Hops Cramorant. We've also got Dodrio and Pidgeotto for card draw, since there's no Squovit or Bibarel. And then we've got Noivern, which can hit for 110 for 0 energy if you can hand match the opponent. And Gale Wings Talonflame with no Fletchinder or Fletchling, just relying on that ability to get it into play. Ethan Angelini brought Psychic Spread, a big bad from GLC years past, taking it to a 4-2-1 record with old classics like Eerie Voice Mismagius and Sinister Hand Dusknoir to move those damage counters around the opponent's Pokemon, along with newcomers like Uxie and Munkidori. Joseph Novak brought the new Silvally and Gladion's battle cards from Pitch Black to a 4-3 record. This was a card I was excited for in my set review for Colorless, and I hadn't even considered the combination with Swellow to be able to hit for 140 damage with just a triple energy to take 2 prizes. He also had Academy at Night in the deck, which was really cool, a way to put a playable card on the top of the deck when you use Squovit, so you can guarantee that you have an empty hand after you use Nest Dash. So that way you can then use Silvally and Gladion on the following turn. Joseph was the only player who brought the new Silvally, but I feel like this was a pretty successful proof of concept at least. And then Melissa Mendelson brought a fighting deck with Hisuian Arcanine, Roaring Resolve Lucario, and Midnight Fang Lycanroc, and went 4-3. And in fact, I heard she was actually 3-1 after round 4, but then ended up playing against 3 Turbo Blazers in a row after that. I'm going to be honest and say that I do not know what the Lycanroc is meant to be used for, other than being a dog to go along with Arcanine, Lucario, and Okidogi, but I absolutely love seeing Arcanine and Lucario in a deck together again. Loved playing those Pokemon together in my old Donphan Earthquake deck. Count Sliggoo, who is usually known for being an expert at playing metal decks, well, did play a basic metal energy in this tournament, but in a dragon deck, going 4-3 with a deck focusing on psychic and metal energy dragons like Dialga, Ultra Necrozma, Kyurem, and even Latios from Mega Evolution base. And I think Kyurem is probably the main focus of this deck because we see the new Misty's Vitality card alongside the similar Gita supporter. And so I imagine that part of what this deck was meant to do was to find that Misty's Vitality ASAP, charge up the Kyurem early, and just try to take 3 knockouts as soon as possible. Very, very cool new dragon build from Consiglio here. And then finally, we have this absolutely bizarre but 4 wins, 3 losses fighting deck from John Thrasher, which includes Sliverwing, Stonejourner, Counterattack Hitmonchan, and Cloth. There's no spicy curry or any way to self-inflict status on Cloth besides its own attack. I have no idea what's going on with the Pokemon lineup here, aside from the standard Rocks, Dogi, Tinglu, and Terrakion, but no Barbaracle either. The only clue I have for what's going on here is I see cards like Penny, Acerola, and Mallow and Lana, which would indicate a Dogi Loop style of wall healing deck. But again, you generally want to include Barbaracle for that and not whatever these Pokemon are. But this deck got 4 wins. John, if you are watching this, please let us know in the comments what this deck is meant to be doing and why are you running the Cloth, the Hitmonchan, and the Stonejourner. So that was it. A very exciting pitch black 3K that seems to indicate that the metagame can heal from this psychic fighting oppression as we keep getting strong cards for other types besides psychic and fighting. Not going to do any remix videos for this 3K. I've just got a lot of other personal projects I'm working on at the moment, and those videos are kind of more work than they're worth, honestly. Let me know what you think about the metagame right now for GLC and how you think the meta is going to shake out after this. We don't have another 3K until November, so go out there and enjoy GLC at your LGS. Enjoy the off season, and I hope I've made GLC more interesting and more fun. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. See you next time.